They had heard the rumors long before they saw them. Whispers carried across prisoner lines, half-believed tales of American artillery that never slept. But for the German officers at the front, such stories were easy to dismiss. "Another Allied exaggeration," one colonel said, waving his hand as if brushing dust from his sleeve. "No gun can keep up that pace. Machines break. Men tire." To the soldiers in the frozen trenches of 1944, though, the front already sounded different. In the distance, low thumps pulsed through the ground like a second heartbeat. They came at odd hours, day and night, never quite stopping. At first, the Germans laughed at the irregular rhythm. "They call that coordination?" they joked. From a hill overlooking the Ardennes, Lieutenant Keller raised his binoculars. Through mist and smoke, he saw flashes, brief, disciplined flickers from behind the Allied lines. The bursts seemed small compared to the German batteries, which roared like thunder. Yet something about those flickers unsettled him. They were patient, repetitive, precise. "Tiny toys," his sergeant muttered. "Our guns could swallow them whole." Keller nodded, though uneasily. He had been trained to respect persistence more than size. Still, orders were orders. The Americans were amateurs in artillery. Loud, perhaps, but fleeting. That evening, in a nearby farmhouse serving as command post, the Americans were anything but loud. Captain Morgan sat by a lantern, reading letters from home between dispatches. His men cleaned their gun barrels with the routine of factory workers, sleeves rolled, faces streaked with soot and rain. They did not speak of glory. They spoke of schedules, bearings, coordinates. Each strike was part of an endless cycle. Reload, adjust, fire, rest 1 minute, fire again. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. The sound of shells rolling into place echoed like a slow, stubborn drumbeat. Private Rossi, youngest of the crew, counted under his breath. "Every 5 minutes," he said. "She likes to keep time." Morgan smiled without looking up. "Then keep her dancing, son." At dawn, the fog thickened until the trees seemed to float. Keller's men waited for their own batteries to signal the morning barrage. It came late, a rumble of pride rather than purpose. When silence followed, they relaxed, until another sound replaced it. Soft, relentless. A pulse that never stopped long enough for them to rest. "Still them," said the sergeant, frowning. "How long have they been firing?" Keller checked his watch. "All night." He tried to dismiss the anxiety rising in him. No army could maintain such constancy. Yet every few minutes, another tremor rippled through the mud. The men could no longer tell day from night. The ground itself had learned to shake. In the Allied lines, Morgan's crew rotated like clockwork. They ate from tin cans, slept in shifts of 30 minutes, and measured success not in territory, but in rhythm. The guns became metronomes of resolve. Rossi scribbled in his notebook between rounds. "It's strange, Captain. The gun never really stops, like it has its own heartbeat." Morgan read the line and underlined 2 words. "Never stops." He looked out across the gray horizon where flashes of German counterfire bloomed and faded. "Let them think we're machines," he said quietly. "Machines don't surrender." By week's end, the German officers began to notice the fatigue in their men. Eyes ringed with sleeplessness, nerves frayed by the constant, distant thudding. It wasn't the volume, it was the persistence. The enemy's guns spoke a language of endurance, and it was beginning to rewrite morale. General Volker, the same man who once dismissed those toy cannons, studied a new report. Continuous fire observed for 72 hours. He frowned, tapping his pencil. "Impossible," he said again, but softer this time. Outside, another ripple of sound rolled across the hills. The windows rattled. Volker turned to his aide. "Find out how they do it." That night, as sleet turned to heavy rain, Keller stood alone near the edge of the forest. The horizon flickered, steady, unhurried. He realized then that arrogance had a sound, and it wasn't loud. It was the silence that came before acknowledging you were wrong. He whispered into the dark, not to anyone in particular. "They never stop, do they?" No answer came, only the distant, faithful beat of the guns, marking time like the ticking of history itself. By the second week, the sound stopped being artillery and became weather. It was not a single crash to startle a man. It was an atmosphere to live inside. Boots sank into rhythm as if the soil had grown lungs. Men spoke in sentences shortened by the next tremor. Letters home mentioned it the way farmers mention rain. Constant, impartial, necessary. On the German side, Lieutenant Keller watched men grow quiet in a way training manuals never described. The loud ones turned inward. The steady ones began to flinch at teacups rattling in their saucers. Sleep arrived as a rumor and left as a joke. The problem, Keller realized, was not fear of the next shell, it was certainty of it. A fear you can't bargain with seeps under doors. Reports stacked up, telegraph lines cut, supply carts delayed, medics moving the wounded in zigzags to avoid the places where the earth remembered to shake. "They aim at roads, crossings, habits," said the sergeant, tracing a finger over a map. "They aim at the clock." Across the line, Captain Morgan's crew kept the clock honest. Shifts swapped like cogs. Hands blistered, healed, blistered again. A chaplain made his rounds with coffee and ragged jokes. He called the guns bells and said they were ringing for a future that hadn't learned its own name. Private Rossi began naming the days by the color of the sky. Gray Monday, White Tuesday, Copper Wednesday. The day smoke and sunrise conspired to paint the horizon with a metallic glow. He wrote, "It feels like we are laying rails across time. Every round, another length of track." The Americans faced their own fraying edges. A loader's shoulder gave out. A driver snapped at a medic and then apologized, crying into his sleeve. Morgan never raised his voice. He mended the crew with routine. One more adjustment. One more log entry. One more cup of coffee. He believed in small, brave things stacked close. At dusk, Keller's unit moved to a new tree line, a quiet pocket marked on the map. The pocket lasted 20 minutes. A soft roll of sound reached them, polite as a knock. No direct hits, just the slow erasure of confidence. One man laughed and walked away, the sound too bright. Keller followed, took the man by the elbow, led him back. "Stand with me," he said. He did not add until I remember how. Somewhere behind the American lines, a quartermaster spoke of miracles. Spare wheels that arrived on the hour, fuel that seemed to grow from gravel. It was not miracle but intention. 100 small systems agreeing to keep a promise no one had written, only lived. The guns kept time because thousands of hands refused to drop the beat. Near midnight, Keller stood listening again. It felt like standing in a clock tower, gears larger than nations turning overhead. He thought of his father's workshop, of the way a single tooth on a gear, if worn, could stall a whole machine. He wondered which tooth he was. He wondered which tooth Morgan was. He wondered what story this clock was telling. All he knew for certain was this: the men who had called those American guns temporary thunder were wrong about the weather. This was not a storm. Storms pass. This was climate. War had taught everyone to measure life in intervals. The quiet between blasts, the meal between shifts, the night between mornings that sounded identical. Between one pulse and the next, small human worlds tried to exist. In a cellar near the line, a French family set bowls on a table that listed toward a cracked wall. The mother hummed to keep the soup from tasting like fear. When the ground nudged the cutlery, the little boy said, "Drums," and the mother said, "Yes, parade drums," and did not look at the ceiling. Outside, an American medic paused at the door, listened, and smiled. He knew what it cost a mother to rename thunder. Private Rossi kept a ledger. Not of shells, others tallied those, but of mercies. A spare glove found, a letter answered, a joke landed. He added one line most days, no gaps in the rhythm. The line looked cold on paper. Inside the crew tent, it felt like warmth. A steady beat meant their friends in the forward trenches slept a little longer, breathed a little steadier, crossed roads a little faster. On the German side, Keller asked his men to write too. Anything, even one word. An odd order that made them grin. Some wrote bread, others after, one wrote blue. He posted the paper on a beam. "Proof," he said, "that we remember language." The sergeant added, "And that language remembers us." As winter chewed the fields into a paste of ice and mud, the relentlessness reshaped strategy without a single shouted debate. Scouts crept differently. Platoons waited a minute longer on each bend. Mess lines shortened to unspool quickly. The map itself seemed to sag under the weight of constant percussion. Roads that had once been arteries turned to veins, then to threads. Keller's pencil wore to a nub tracing detours that lasted only a morning. Morgan's crew discovered new rituals. Someone began tying a short ribbon to the breech at dawn and cutting it free at dusk, a child's alarm clock measuring the day's breath. The chaplain blessed the ribbon once, then stopped, deciding it was already sacred enough. Sometimes the counter battery roared, sudden and personal. Dirt leapt. A crate exploded into a confetti of nails and curses. For a few minutes, the rhythm became a conversation. Theirs, ours, then settled back into monologue. After one such exchange, Morgan found Rossi shaking. "It's the silence," Rossi admitted, "between theirs and ours." Like a missing stair, Morgan nodded. "Then we build the next stair." Toward the end of the month, a rumor drifted into Keller's dugout. An entire German unit had advanced through a small corridor during a lull, only to find the lull belonged to them alone. The other side did not recognize the concept. Keller folded the rumor into his pocket like a map. "They've made continuation into doctrine," he told the sergeant. "Our cleverness touches their constancy and dissolves." In villages far from the front, people learned the clock too. Bakers timed ovens by it, priests timed prayers, lovers timed goodbyes. A shopkeeper remarked, "When it ceases, I'll drop a plate to hear something else." He never got the chance. The plate survived the war. What changed first was not the line on the map. What changed was posture. Men walked as if listening. Orders were given with an ear tilted toward the horizon. The war had acquired a heartbeat, and everyone, friends, foes, and the frightened in between, had learned to live by it. It ended the way most turning points do. Not with trumpets, but with a steadily widening quiet that no one trusted at first. One dawn came and the horizon did not flicker. Another came and the ground behaved like ground. Men woke before the signal and found there was none. Someone laughed too loud and cried for it. The quiet unnerved Keller more than the constant. Nature without the metronome felt drunk. He walked the line and heard birds attempting to remember their own songs. The men did not cheer, they listened, suspicious of peace. Then slowly they straightened. One man raised his head and said, "I can hear my name in my skull again." And Keller, who had never liked poetry, nodded. Across the former front, Morgan's crew stood around their metal bell and looked embarrassed at its stillness. The chaplain touched the breech the way one touches a friend's shoulder after a long illness. "Thank you," he said, then said nothing else. Rossi opened his ledger and wrote a new line. "First day with no beat. We are learning to breathe without counting." He closed the book as if putting a child to bed. In the staff rooms where pride had once kept pace with certainty, the lesson arrived on soft sole shoes. An aging German general, the same who once dismissed the little American field pieces with a flick of wrist, read a memorandum that listed no calibers, no trajectories, only schedules, rotations, resupply grids, and the simple arithmetic of persistence. He set the paper down and whispered, "They turned time into a weapon," surprised to find admiration in his mouth. What the relentless days had taught did not fit easily on diagrams. It was a moral of logistics and a spirituality of labor, that small, repeatable acts performed as a promise become greater than the sum of their metal. The guns had been loud, yes, but the power lay in the hands that never stopped meeting the task without ceremony. Keller, released at last to a rear village, found himself in a church where the floorstones hummed with remembered thunder. He lit a candle for no one and everyone. A child asked why. "Because repetition is a prayer," he said, surprising himself again. Outside, carts rolled. Inside, his shoulders came down from his ears. Morgan's crew disbanded over weeks. The gun was hauled to a depot, stripped, inventoried, stored. Before it vanished into numbers, someone chalked a last ribbon onto the breech, a final mark of days done faithfully. Morgan removed his cap and said the only speech he trusted. "We kept time." No one clapped. They did not need to. Long after, veterans would talk about excellence as if it were glamour. But those who had lived inside the beat knew otherwise. Excellence had been a stack of small decisions: to wake, to load, to check, to fire, to log, to hand a cup, to take a shift, to forgive a snap, to fix a wheel, to lift again. It was work. The kind that, given long enough, rewrites even an enemy's opinion. Years later, the field was only a meadow. Cows grazed where men once counted. Grass had woven and shut the scars. If you pressed your ear to the earth, you heard only earth. The clock had been dismantled and shared among a million ordinary days. Keller, now a school teacher with ink-stained fingers, took his students on a walk to the ridge. He told them about weather, the real kind, and the kind humans make. He did not name units or models. He spoke of rhythm, of the danger of swagger, of how constancy outlasts cleverness. A boy asked, "Was it loud?" Keller looked over the green and said, "Loud enough to make us forget silence." That was the worst of it, and the best across an ocean. Morgan sat on a porch with a ledger in his lap. The book had grown soft at the edges. He had added lines for years, neighbor's fence mended, granddaughter's bike fixed, another coffee poured for a friend who needed it. He traced the old wartime sentence with a fingertip. No gaps in the rhythm. Then he smiled at the absurd grace of it and wrote, "A day with nothing urgent, and I let it be." Museums kept a few of the old pieces behind ropes. School children stared at them, expecting heroics to leap out. The plaques named campaigns and dates. What they could not display was the hum inside the men who had stood nearby, the way a steady job done well can alter a map, a mind, a war. At reunions, some argued about tactics, others about politics. Then someone would ask, "What do you remember most?" And quiet would fall, and voices would say versions of the same truth. Not the blast, but the beat. Not the shout, but the schedule. Not the miracle, but the million small obediences to a chosen task. One autumn, Keller visited the meadow alone. He brought no flowers, no flags. He stood, hands in coat pockets, and whispered toward the old horizon line, "I was wrong." The wind took the confession without comment. He added, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure to whom. Perhaps to the men on both sides who had learned painfully what endurance can do and undo. As evening turned the grass the color of brass, a distant church bell marked the hour. Keller realized why the sound made him ache. Bells, like guns, keep time. But one calls men to shelter, the other sends them away. He had lived long enough to prefer the first. He hoped the lesson would outlive him, that constancy is a tool, and like all tools, its holiness depends on the hand that holds it. Morgan died old with sawdust on his sleeves and the ledger on his nightstand. The chaplain said a few words, then read a line they found taped inside the book. "We fired to keep friends alive. We worked to keep the hour. When the work changed, the promise did not." People nodded as if they recognized a melody, and the world, which had learned so many wrong lessons and a few right ones, kept moving. Trains ran on time. Nurses made rounds at midnight. Bakers woke before dawn. Somewhere a young sergeant told a young private, "Small things done right forever." Somewhere a teacher drew a clock on a board and wrote, "Be wary of swagger. Trust the steady." The meadow, remembering nothing and everything, turned quiet gold under the last light. If you stood very still, you could almost hear it. The faintest hint of a heartbeat, not of war, but of work done faithfully. A rhythm you could build a life around. A rhythm that once, in a darker season, had convinced an arrogant enemy to listen, and then to learn.